Welcome back to Indiana at the voice of college football. And we got a big show tonight. Sorry about it being late. Had some stuff going on. But tonight, we got to talk about the Indiana Hoosiers and their college football playoff team. They are going to be in the college football playoff. I put a question mark on the banner because there's still people trying to argue that Indiana doesn't belong in the playoffs. And we're going to get to that in a minute and more. But so excited to see that Indiana's ranked at number 9 in the CFP rankings. Still believe they should be higher, honestly. I really do. But there's a lot of detractors. There's a lot of people saying that strength of schedule. A lot of people talking about that blowout loss to Ohio State, that's why that they are not higher. But I still disagree. I think that Indiana beating Michigan, who beat Ohio State, should be evidence enough that this is a good football team. And the fact that they did completely destroy all of the other teams that they, played, all those bad teams that they faced, they blew them out, which was very impressive. But a lot of people just don't seem to think so. Like, oh, well, Indiana's no good because they didn't play anybody. Well, again, a lot of teams like your Miamis that didn't have tough schedules, they didn't blow everybody out. They were barely beating people. And finally, those losses creeped up against unranked teams in Georgia Tech and Syracuse. And now they're on the outside of the playoffs looking in, and people are still arguing that they should be in. So that's the craziest thing right there. But everybody, appreciate you for being here. Like the stream down below. Subscribe to the channel if you're new, whether you're on the Big Ten channel or the Indiana channel. We definitely appreciate it. And let's get into some Indiana Hoosier talk. As we have, portal news going on. We've got the playoff rankings going on and a lot of awards and other stuff to talk about. But first thing we got to talk about is Indiana is in the playoffs. That is a fact. No doubt in my mind will Indiana make the playoffs no matter what. It doesn't matter with, all the discussion about, some teams that could pass. It doesn't matter. Indiana's in. No matter what happens in the conference championship games, they're good to go. We got One Scoop John here. Appreciate it. Saying we got Jeffrey or Indiana in the playoffs. You'll get your shot. Appreciate that, John. And we also got Jackson as well saying Indiana SMU would be pretty cool. Jackson's playoffs. I just want to see Indiana win a CFP game. Me too, Jackson. It's such an iconic line. You can reuse it any which way. Absolutely. Definitely appreciate you guys for being here. But the reason why I want to talk about this is because Indiana is in the playoffs. But there's a lot of people saying that they still shouldn't be. Look at this article right here. You've got somebody saying on USA Today, time to end the Indiana charade and move beyond the College Football Playoff Novelty Act. Basically what he's trying to say is that Indiana does not deserve to be in the playoffs over a team like Ole Miss or even Alabama or South Carolina from the SEC who have 3 losses because of the fact that Indiana hasn't played anybody and that they're going to get destroyed against some of these better teams. And the thing is in some instances, I can understand that. You got like Army. You want to use that argument with Army. Well, Army's in the American Conference. Army has played basically nobody, and then their one big game was Notre Dame. They got blown out. Well, Indiana, yeah, their biggest game was Ohio State, and they got blown out, but they did hang with them. Overall, there was a couple bad calls in that game that definitely stretched out that lead. It was a lot closer than the score would indicate. I've said that the whole time, and a lot of people agree with that, but other people still want to say that the game was a blowout. It was not a blowout. It was a lot closer than the score would indicate. But this person right here is saying Indiana does not belong in that, it's a charity act. And look at Ole Miss, the same Ole Miss team that beat Georgia by 18. And Ole Miss is great, and they should be in the playoffs and all that. Well, here's the thing. Yeah, Ole Miss is good. They're a good team. Really, really good team. And they did beat Georgia by 18. That's impressive. Does anybody remember that Ole Miss lost to Kentucky? Does anybody remember that? I do. I remember it. Does anybody remember that Alabama lost to Vandy and Oklahoma? So these teams that people are saying are so great have had horrible games this year. Georgia almost lost to Mississippi State, who's a 2-win team. Georgia almost lost to Kentucky, who's a 4-win team. Georgia struggled with Georgia Tech and should have lost that game, but the refs bailed them out. And I'm out here saying that the refs bailed them out because they absolutely did. But you're wanting to say that Indiana does not deserve to be in, and these teams do, even though these teams have all had garbage games. And then this guy's talking about how Indiana had a good season back in 2020, and this is a nice story as well. It's the same thing that they're not that good. Well, here's the thing. That he's saying that Indiana lost to 5-5 Ole Miss that year, and Ohio State went to the national championship game and lost. So that proves that Indiana's still good. Again, the problem is with that statement is that Indiana did not have Michael Penix Jr. in that bowl game. Probably dude doesn't even know that. And he wouldn't have wrote this. Indiana did not have Michael Penix Jr. in that bowl game. If they did, they would have won that game. It's like they would have won the Tennessee game in 2019. Indiana could not keep Penix upright. He got hurt, and that's that. Difference with Indiana this year, they kept their QB upright. Curtis Rourke, outside of a thumb injury that he unfortunately got hurt on a helmet, that was unfortunate. Curtis Rourke stayed healthy. Indiana's kept him upright for the most part. And Indiana's offense has been much better than that year. You cannot compare this year's Indiana team to that 2020 team or the 2019 team. This is a much more complete team. Indiana's defense is a whole lot better, and Indiana's offense is a whole lot better. It's not just the QB, just like it was with Penix those 2 seasons. Indiana is a much more complete team. It's just a dumb argument. I mean, this guy probably doesn't follow Indiana football that much, but I just don't know how you can really justify Indiana being a bad football team when Indiana beat the team that went to the horseshoe and won. Indiana beat Michigan. They won. And Michigan went on to beat Ohio State, who's supposedly everybody's second best team in college football before this loss. Again, these arguments are just bad. They are bad. You're going to try to justify Ole Miss being in the playoff. Yeah, they beat Georgia. They had a really freaking good game that game. But you know what? They also went out there and lost to Kentucky, a 4-win team. So I don't care. Indiana won their games. Ole Miss did not. Ole Miss choked at Florida. Alabama sucked against Oklahoma and Vandy. Only reason why they're still probably going to make the playoffs is because Ole Miss choked against Florida, because A&M choked against Auburn. And you could be like, well, those teams in the SEC are really, really good. Well, you know what? That's an SEC problem for making their conference so good with all these great teams that they're all beating up on each other. That doesn't mean that they belong in the playoffs. What's the point of winning your games if you don't let a team in? If you're going to really let Alabama and Ole Miss and these other teams into the playoff over Indiana, then that's just garbage. There's no point for Indiana to even play their games. There's no point. Just because those teams are bigger brands and all that, and Indiana's not a brand doesn't mean anything. Indiana won their games. If Indiana had a loss to Michigan and Ohio State, they would not be in the playoff. That's a fact. Just like if Alabama had a loss to South Carolina too and they were 8-4, they wouldn't be in. I mean, it can go on and on. We could do this all day. Indiana's in the playoffs no matter what this dude says. You can't change the rules. You can't make it where, the SEC now gets 7 teams in and none of the other conferences get any of their teams in because, Indiana's a joke. This dude ain't arguing for Penn State not to be in. What's Penn State done? Penn State hasn't done anything. Penn State, beat a average West Virginia team in the non-conference, something Indiana doesn't have. They don't have that. But I can guarantee you that if Kurt Cignetti was the coach last year, he wouldn't have canceled that Louisville game. That was a Tom Allen thing to try to save his job. But even if Indiana had that win over Louisville, they still wouldn't care. They wouldn't care. So, and Penn State's best wins over Illinois. Is Illinois that much better than Michigan? No. I mean, again, it's just bad. It's just bad, very bad analysis. Everybody has a right to their opinion, and this guy has a right to his opinion. But I just don't like how everybody is trying to justify that Indiana doesn't belong in. Everybody was trying to do that with TCU, but it wasn't even that bad that year. TCU got in, beat Michigan in the semifinals, then got drudged by Georgia. And the thing is, like, that game is like it changed everybody's opinion on these teams getting in. People wanted Cincinnati in too. But now that Indiana's in here, no one wants Indiana. You know what? It's a 12-team playoff. This isn't a 4-team playoff. Nobody is arguing for Indiana to be in a 4-team playoff. This is a 12-team playoff. They expanded the playoff. Indiana's 11-1. Only loss is to the number 2 ranked team in the country before they just lost to Michigan. Indiana's in the playoff no matter what. It's not a question. I put it on the thumbnail, and it is still a question in some people's mind, but according to the FBI predictor, Indiana has a 99% chance to make the playoff no matter what happens in the Clemson SMU ACC title game, in the Georgia-Texas SEC title game. None of these title games is going to matter. Indiana is in the college football playoff, and I'm very happy to see it, even if these media members are not happy to see it because they want all these SEC teams in the playoff. Funny thing about it is, though, to me, is that people are saying Indiana's trash. Well, let's look real quick at some of the great players that Indiana has had this season. Look at these all Big Ten players. Indiana has 6 players on the all Big Ten team on the first, second, and third team. You've got Aiden Fisher, linebacker, all Big Ten first team. Mikael Kamara, defensive line, all Big Ten first team. D'Angelo Pons, defensive back, all Big Ten first team. Indiana has 3 all Big Ten first team players. That's really good. Like, really good. Indiana hasn't had that in forever. I think during the 2019 and 2020 season, Indiana had one player that was all first team. I think it was the one defender. And that was it. And Penix wasn't because Penix missed too much time to be all first team. Indiana's got 3. And Curtis Rourke is all second team, which is a joke. Dylan Gabriel is all first team Big Ten. And guess what? He's got less touchdowns than Curtis Rourke, more interceptions than Curtis Rourke, and a worse QBR. I get Oregon's undefeated and Indiana has a loss, but if you're basing off stats, Curtis Rourke should be first team. And Rourke did it in less games because he only played in 10.5 games. He missed a game and a half because, unfortunately, that thumb injury is what it is. Can't do anything about that. Injuries happen. Can't throw the football if you break your thumb. And Rourke was playing with screws in his thumb. And people are saying, oh, Rourke didn't do good. Well, you know what? Against Michigan and Ohio State, he was coming off that thumb injury. Maybe there was still some rust. I'm not saying anything about it, but still, it's hard to throw a football when you got a literal screw in your finger. But Indiana mopped up the floor in all Big Ten selections. Mike Kadick was all third team. He did really well. Elijah Surratt was all Big Ten third team. And then you had a whole host of honorable mentions. It would be too long to count. I'm not even going to bother counting through all the honorable mentions because there's like 10 guys that were on honorable mentions for charity awards and some just for their play because they did well. Some of them probably should have been all Big Ten third team at least. Like C.J. West was one of the honorable mention selections. C.J. West had a great season. Absolute great season. And Jalen Walker as well at linebacker. Why wasn't he on the third team? He was fantastic. Aiden Fisher definitely was the standout, but Jalen Walker was really good as well. All those guys were great. If Indiana is such a bad football team, then why do they have all these all Big Ten selections? You wouldn't have all those all Big Ten selections if they were a bad team. It wouldn't happen. I mean, so many of these guys have been studs all year long. I mean, Mikel Kamara leads the Big Ten in sacks and pressures. Curtis Rourke is at the top of the Big Ten in QBR, and he actually leads the nation in QBR. Curtis Rourke is the highest player at quarterback in the country in QBR, all across the nation. That's unreal. And he's like 5th or 6th in the Heisman odds. Again, didn't miss a game and a half, probably would be going up to New York or wherever they're going to have the Heisman Trophy ceremony. That's unreal. I mean, all I know is when you look at this football team and you see all these all Big Ten players, you just can't justify that Indiana's bad. Am I saying Indiana's a top 5 or even a top 10 team? I'm not saying that, but they won their games, and they're in the Big Ten, the second toughest conference in college football. If any other team, and I repeat this, if any other football team was 11-1 in the SEC or the Big Ten that's not named Indiana, no one will be debating this. People aren't even debating SMU, which is hilarious. SMU's 11-1 right now. Nobody's debating SMU but IU. Why? Why is Indiana the only team that people want to debate that they shouldn't be in the playoff? They're 11-1 in the Big Ten. Okay, their schedule was a little bit easier this year than in past years. So, does it matter? I mean, Notre Dame's strength of schedule isn't ripping up the roads. Notre Dame hasn't won a big game in like 30 years in the postseason. 30 freaking years. Indiana hasn't won a big game in the postseason ever. But what's the difference? Just because Notre Dame won big games back in the 80s, with their head coaches in the past, Lou Holtz and Newt Rockne in the 20s and 30s and other does that matter? I don't think it matters. I don't think it matters at all. Indiana won their games. Like, even if I wasn't an Indiana fan sitting here, I would still say that Indiana belongs in the playoffs. It's not bias here. They belong in the playoffs. I would think even if Rutgers was 11-1 right now, even Rutgers, maybe they'd have a few detractors, but you wouldn't have the amount of people in the press and the media just destroying IU saying they don't belong in. It's just something that's messed up. Yeah, Jonathan Davis, agree 100%. Indiana is in, the debate is over. Yes, it should be over. But you know what? That article that I read you, this article saying about Indiana, the charade, don't let them in, this was written today. It was written today. Indiana is still having people saying they don't belong in the playoffs even today. Yeah, they aren't falling 4 spots without playing. It's not even mathematically possible with all the remaining games that are left. At most, they could fall 1 spot. Maybe. It's not feasible. I don't even see them falling at all. To me, they only have room to go up. Like if SMU loses and Georgia loses, which probably they'd still have Georgia ranked ahead of Indiana, which is a joke. But still, I mean, they're not falling out of the playoffs. And if they did fall out of the playoffs, then that's ridiculous. Yeah, I agree. It was written just for clicks. The only reason I showed it is for the show. I mean, I don't care. I think the article's absolutely horrible. But it's just people having to continue to drone on about a point in an argument that's just completely non-existent and useless. It's just ridiculous to even point out. It doesn't matter what they say. I use in. And it doesn't matter that Ole Miss is a better football team than Indy. Who cares? Like, it doesn't matter. I mean, again, if that's your argument, then just eliminate all the other conferences and just allow SEC teams to make a playoff and let the other conferences duke it out for another playoff or whatever, or only allow a select few teams from the Big Ten. Like if you want Ohio State in and Michigan, Penn State, and then like from the ACC, maybe Clemson, whatever, and that call it a day. Let the brands compete for a playoff and then let everybody else duke it out for another playoff. Because I can guarantee you, if you did that, Indiana would be at the top of the other proverbial playoff. But that's not how it works. You have a playoff system set up where Big 12 and ACC and even Mountain West champions can get in the playoff that don't even deserve to be in. I mean, does Boise State deserve to be in? No. No, they don't. If you're going off, they haven't played anybody, they haven't beaten anybody, whatever. Okay, and people say the Oregon game. Well, that was week 2. You think they'd hang with Oregon today? No, they wouldn't. So it's just bad. It's just bad media and press, and just the reasoning is terrible. And for whatever reason, it's just a vendetta that people have against IU because they don't do it with any other team. It's only Indiana. Like, okay, Indiana's the losingest Power 4 program of all time. Who cares? None of that matters this year because you know what? They won their games this year. This isn't Indiana from last season. And you know what? Next year's Indiana might be different. They might be different. Indiana might be worse. They might be 8-4 next year. They might not be in the playoff discussion next year. I hope they are, but they might not be. But that still doesn't change the fact of what this year's team was. Yeah, Jonathan Dave said Alabama 11's the biggest show, made it clear it's TV show made for ESPN, not a playoff. Well, I mean, the sad thing about it is that Alabama is one of the 12 best teams in the country, probably. So basing off your logic, not a playoff of the 12 best teams, Alabama probably is one of the 12 best teams, and that's where that article's point's coming in. My point is I don't care who the 12 best teams are. You have to win your games. Alabama wasn't one of the 12 best teams when they lost to Oklahoma by 21. Ole Miss wasn't one of the 12 best teams when they lost to Kentucky, but when they both beat Georgia, yeah, they were. Ole Miss was one of the 12 best teams when they beat Georgia. Bama was one of the 12 best teams when they beat Georgia and laid the wood against LSU, but they haven't been consistent. So since they haven't been consistent and they didn't win all their games and they're both 9-3, they don't belong in my opinion. You have to win your games. You have to reward winning. I mean, I understand if Indiana's strength of schedule was Army bad, but it's not. Indiana beat Michigan. Michigan beat Ohio State. To me, that should be enough to get them in. 11-1, it should be over. But all these Hoosiers are all Big Ten players that have had great seasons, and some of them are probably going to be NFL draft picks unless the NFL teams have bias as well against Indiana and won't draft these dudes. They've had great seasons, and that's a big reason, in my opinion, that Indiana has proven that they are at least worthy of being in the playoffs, even if they're not one of the 12 best teams. They definitely have proven that they are worth being in the playoffs. The other thing we got to talk about is Cignetti, Coach of the Year. This is huge as well. All thanks to Curt Cignetti. It's just amazing what he has done. As you can see, he is the Big Ten and Dave McClain Coach of the Year. So you had Tom Allen winning like a couple Coach of the Year awards back in 2020, but like Cignetti's racking up Coach of the Year awards. He's probably going to win like all the national awards. I know some people are saying you got Dan Lanning in Oregon. Some people are saying Kenny Dillingham, even for some reason Deion Sanders and a few others. But I mean, to me, based off everything that Indiana has had historically, it was just losing, and their 3-9 season last year, and then Cignetti comes in and they go 11-1. He should get all the Coach of the Year awards. It shouldn't even be a contest. Jonathan Davis says Alabama's not a top 15 team, not top 12 playoff team. The thing is that talent-wise, they are a top 12 team. And when they played Georgia, when they played LSU, and they played Missouri, they were. The problem is that they're not consistent because their scheming is bad because they have a running quarterback, and some teams can shut that down. But going off talent, Alabama's recruiting rankings the last 5 years have all been in the top 5. They are a top 12 team. They're not playing like it, though, and that's why they don't belong in. But see, what they're trying to justify is that those teams that are top 12 teams that haven't won their games should be in anyway. That's not fair. You don't get in if you don't win, even if your talent is there. That's all I'm saying. I get what you're saying, but yes, Alabama is a top 12 team on paper. And when they play at their best, they are better than Indiana by far. But they don't belong in. They just don't, because they didn't win their games. They decided to choke against Oklahoma. They decided not to change their scheme where Milroe doesn't run the ball at all, and he has to throw the ball, and he throws 3 picks. I mean, when he's able to run the ball, he's great. When he's not, then Alabama is a flawed team. I get your point, though, but that's just all I'm saying. But yeah, I mean, Cignetti should win all the Coach of the Year awards. What he's done, I mean, breaking all of these records is unreal. Like, you're talking about most points in a game for IU, most yards in a game for IU, most wins in a season. Beating Michigan only for the second time since 1987. All these things and more is just unreal. Like, I cannot believe the amount of things that Cignetti has done. Like, getting fans in the stands. Like, people are now saying Indiana's a football school. It was a joke when Tom Allen was there, but now people mean it. Like, I've seen some recent IU basketball games. The crowds are poor, and I know it's non-con. Like, when Purdue comes to town later in the year in basketball, I know there's going to be people there. But Mike Woodson's not doing a great job at all of getting fan interest at IU basketball. He's losing fans. Indiana football is gaining fans. Like, they said that Indiana this season had the most social media growth of any football team. Like, more people are paying attention to the Hoosiers than ever before, and I think this is sustainable. I mean, the fact that they gave Cignetti the extension, and they're giving the assistant coaches more money as well. Like, they're actually wanting to give the assistant coaches a lot of money to keep them. Like, you see as well, not just Cignetti, you've also got Bryant Haynes as a semifinals for Nation's best assistant coach, and he's been a candidate for some jobs out there, including like ECU and Temple. Well, IU is getting up there with even Ohio State in the assistant coaching pool of now going to be paying all their assistants a combined $11 million, which is what Ohio State has been paying all their assistants. So Indiana's getting in that ballpark for assistant coaches, and all this is because of Cignetti. And people are saying it's not all Cignetti, it's his assistants. Well, I agree. His assistants are a big reason that they're winning. Just like those 2 years with Tom Allen, with Penix, it was because of the assistants of Kalen DeBoer and Kane Womack. But the thing is that Indiana wasn't able to keep those guys. Indiana now is, because they're putting a commitment to football. And when Cignetti got the job, he said, if you show a commitment to football, I'll take the job and I'll stay. He wasn't going to do that otherwise. He wasn't going to take the job if Indiana wasn't going to commit to football. Well, they are going to commit to football. And all of this is because of Curt Cignetti. I mean, the amount of turnaround with this program is just so fun to see. I don't know if I've ever seen a program just so destitute in a sport become this good this fast. And is it sustainable? That's what everybody wants to know. Is it sustainable? And next year, if Indiana goes 7-5, 8-4, I don't even see that as like, oh, they've fallen off and they're no good now. As long as Indiana doesn't have a drop-off like Florida State where you go 15-0, 14-0 or whatever, and then the next year you go 2-10. I mean, as long as Indiana doesn't do that and they're at least bowl eligible next year, I can see this being sustainable. It's going to be tough because Indiana's losing a ton of guys. All these James Madison guys he brought over, hopefully you don't lose an assistant coach or two. We'll have to see with that, but you're going to lose the James Madison guys, a lot of them. You're going to lose a lot of this roster. Rourke's gone. So many seniors. It's going to be interesting to see next year. You're going to have to bring in some portal guys. It doesn't always work. But the thing I do like is that Cignetti has brought in a big recruiting class in high school. He's wanting to build it from the ground up. Get in a couple of good transfers. You don't want to overload it. And hopefully keep some of the key guys from this year. Some of them aren't going to be, out of eligibility. Hopefully some of them come back. Hopefully Indiana can be good next year. And their schedule looking, at Penn State, at Oregon is going to be tough. But I think this is sustainable. I've never in my life, even with Tom Allen, I didn't think it was sustainable. Once Penix was gone, I'm like, yeah, they're going to go back to being kind of bad. But with this, I just feel like it's sustainable. I think Cignetti can make it sustainable. Now, in the long run, we'll see. It doesn't mean that it's going to happen, but I can see it being sustainable, and I hope it is. But, looking at the playoffs, I mean, Indiana being in the playoffs, that's Cignetti. I mean, him being coach of the year, is absolutely deserved. Way more deserved than even Tom Allen. Tom Allen deserved it, but Cignetti deserves to sweep up all the awards. Hopefully Rourke can even go to the Heisman, ceremony as well. I hope it can happen. Probably won't, but I hope it does. But it's just amazing to see. I mean, Indiana being in the conversation with Georgia, with Notre Dame, some of those potential opponents that they can play in the playoffs. I hope they play more like Notre Dame or Tennessee or even Penn State. I know people don't want Penn State. It's boring to play a Big Ten team, but I hope they play Penn State, Notre Dame, or Tennessee more than Georgia. I don't want to see them play Georgia. The way Georgia hits and all that, and the way the rest were in that Georgia Tech game, that'd probably not be good. So hopefully not. But Curt Cignetti just absolutely deserves Coach of the Year. It's just a glorious thing. I mean, they had like a video the other day on Indiana's Twitter account where they were just showing, our coach, like what he's done, building up week by week, and how there were no fans, and now there's tons of fans there. Indiana being a football school, selling out the crowd. It was just a beautiful thing to see. I even wrote that. I'm like, this is beautiful. I mean, it is like, if you're not a college football fan, I can get why that wouldn't do anything for you. But if you are a college football fan and that doesn't at least like move you at all, I mean, for a program as bad as this, you don't have to be an IU fan, but for a program as bad as this, and now one man having a vision and being like, well, we're going to turn this destitute program into something, it's just a great thing to see. And he absolutely deserves Coach of the Year. The last thing we got to talk about really quick before we get out of here, definitely appreciate you guys for being here tonight. Absolutely, with Jonathan Davis saying 8-4 is great for Indiana. But next year, definitely. I'd be happy with that. Absolutely. Still hope they make the playoffs next year, but even 8-4 would be great. Exploring with Ben and Sam, appreciate you being here, says Calgorhythm. Thank you so much for stopping by. That's hilarious there. Yeah, I agree. Games are not played on paper, 100%. But yeah, and the staff being together for so long, I mean, that helps too. That's why it'd be great if they can keep them. And yes, IU basketball does need a Cignetti version of in basketball, absolutely. But the transfer portal, just quick rumblings on the portal. Indiana, we know that they lost some guys earlier in the year, like Donovan McCulley. Lost Donovan McCulley, was just tough. Lost a few other guys. But Indiana, Miller Moss. Curt Cignetti followed Miller Moss on Twitter. I don't know if that means that, or X, as everybody's calling it. I don't know if that means that Miller Moss has any shot of going to IU. I don't know if people even want Miller Moss to go to IU. Because you do have Taven Jackson. You do have a Tyler Cherry that could be a starter next year. I mean, there still could be other guys. Caden Salter's in the portal too. Some people mentioned that. But the fact Cignetti followed Miller Moss on Twitter, there's a chance maybe that there's interest there. I know some people said he could go to Michigan, but you got Bryce Underwood going to Michigan. I don't think Michigan needs a quarterback. I mean, they need a quarterback, but if Bryce Underwood, is signing that big of a deal, NIL deal to go to Michigan, I don't think he's not going to start. It's kind of the way these things work these days. But maybe he will sit a year, kind of like Nico did. But I don't see that as being as frequent these days. A lot of guys are going to transfer if they don't immediately start. It's just kind of the way things are these days. But Miller Moss is a possibility. I mean, I think that Cignetti could get a whole lot more out of Miller Moss than Lincoln Riley could, because it seems like Lincoln Riley kind of thrives more with quarterbacks that are more mobile, quarterbacks that are kind of like Caleb Williams, where they thrive off chaos. Jalen Hurts doesn't seem like he does as well with more pocket passers. And look at Curtis Rourke. Curtis Rourke is about as big of a pocket passer as they come. He can run, but it's not much. So I think Miller Moss would do all right at IU, but it just depends on whether Cignetti's like, do we want to spend a lot to get him, because it's probably going to cost a lot to get Miller Moss. It'd probably be cheaper to, just go with what you got with Taven Jackson or Tyler Cherry, but you just hope one of those guys does well, because if not, then Indiana's not going to have a quarterback. And we saw with Michigan this year, if you don't have a good quarterback, your team just kind of stinks overall, even if you have great talent. And that's why Michigan was able to beat Ohio State. They have great talent, and they played really hard against Ohio State, but they just don't have a quarterback. Threw for 62 yards in that game. So hopefully for Michigan fans, they have much better quarterback play next year. But Indiana's going to have a quarterback, but you just don't want to spend too much on one guy like in Miller Moss, because then you're not going to be able to pay to get other guys in the portal, or, even some more high school signees before the signing day is done, if Indiana can get any more. And that's another thing. Indiana's signing day is coming up, I think tomorrow even, or a couple days from now. And Indiana's got a class ranked in the 40s. It's not too bad, especially for Indiana standards. They used to get classes in the 70s. I mean, Tom Allen had one really good class that was in the 20s, but it wasn't sustainable. But if Cignetti can get a couple more good players, some guys in the portal, then maybe he can have a top 30 to 35 class. That would be solid for Indiana. Hopefully they can build on that in the future. More you keep winning, more money that keeps getting brought into the program, the more guys are going to want to go to IU. And there's a few other guys Indiana might be looking at, but it's so premature in the portal. Just kind of wanted to touch on that really quick to see where things are there. I don't think Indiana's lost anybody really super important yet. McCulley stinks, but it is what it is. He realized he wasn't going to get any playing time, and he wants to, play, because if he had stayed at IU, he would have been in enough games where he would have lost his eligibility. He wants a shot to go pro, so that's why he ended up shutting it down and redshirting, so he can have one more season and one more shot to be able to do something, maybe go to the NFL. Darrell MVP, appreciate you being here. Since Indiana's had such a great season, I'm happy they made the playoffs, but they will probably get destroyed. You know what? With the amount of upsets we've seen this year, I don't know. I mean, I agree with you, Darrell. I think there's a much better chance they get destroyed versus actually winning. But at the same time, we've seen a lot of upsets. A lot of really, really good teams go down to bad teams. So you know what? You never know. Ohio State was supposed to destroy Michigan. Didn't happen. Alabama was supposed to beat Vanderbilt, didn't happen, and Oklahoma as well. Ole Miss supposed to beat Kentucky. We've seen a lot of upsets, so I hope that they don't get destroyed. I hope that they can get a big upset in the playoffs. It would be great and definitely could validate that they belong to be there, since everybody's saying that they don't. But hopefully Indiana does a great job in the playoffs. I am looking forward to that. Looking forward to seeing who they are going to be playing and how things are going to be seeded and how the portal goes for IU. And hopefully the great momentum with Cignetti keeps continuing. Love what Cignetti's done at IU. He's done such a great job. So worthy of Coach of the Year, and definitely have been enjoying the season for Indiana, the best in school history, and hopefully can just keep on getting better with maybe another win or two in the college football playoff, even if it's not likely. But appreciate everybody for being here. Like the stream down below. Subscribe to the channel if you are new. Share the stream out on social media. Definitely get more Hoosier fans in here. We want more IU fans in the house here with us every Tuesday night, 7 Eastern times, always, usually for the most part, but tonight, definitely sorry about it being late, but definitely appreciate you for being here anyway, and post-game shows as well for when Indiana wins or loses as well during, bowl season, when it looks like they're going to be in the playoff. 100% they should. They better be in the playoff. If not, it's absolutely insane. We're doing the post-game for those games just like we've been doing all year on Saturday. Appreciate you, Jackson. Definitely tell people at Publix, all your grocery stores and other places about Hoosiers Live and Only Talk Sports, my YouTube channel as well. Definitely appreciate that. And definitely, hopefully, everybody has a great night. And go Hoosiers. It's been a wonderful season, and hopefully it keeps on getting better. Thanks for being here, everybody.